that the biggest impact that this class has had on me so far is that I've been able to identify parts of myself that I wasn't really open to identifying before. I've really enjoyed looking at the social identity power wheel that we have every slideshow in class, and just kind of centering myself and opening myself up to more discussion based on where I may stand in that. I feel like I've seen the wheel a lot throughout my high school classes and my college classes, but I haven't really done much in regards to like where I am on that wheel. I've seen it and then I've thought, okay, yeah, I understand it, but I've never really thought about it like I have to in this class. I feel like that really is preparing me very well for my future career as an educator, because of course I may be teaching children who are different than me, who have had different experiences and will continue to have different experiences. And for me to try to bond with them and connect with them so that they can have a better learning experience, it won't necessarily go as well if I just, push aside my differences rather than embrace them and understand that maybe I can't always connect with somebody over every single topic, but I can be a good listener and I can try to be a person for them to come to and express how they're feeling. It's really important for me to figure out who I am as a person and how I may interact with others rather than just what I can bring to the table. I feel like that shift in thinking has really helped me a lot in this class, so that I've been able to open up my mind more and think more deeply about the topics that we've talked about.
So the biggest impact that this class has had on me so far has been, I think, just the awareness that the class gives, like in terms of different articles, different news things, a bunch of different topics that we go over. I think it's important, especially for life, but especially in the education field, to know everything that we're up against and everything that we would face. I think new teachers kind of can sometimes feel a little bit blindsided by the amount of issues in the classroom. So I think for this class and for me, it's been nice to, have awareness on a bunch of different issues and just, broaden my knowledge and learn strategies on how I can, better promote diversity, inclusivity in my future classroom.
One big impact that this class has had on me is looking at specific issues that are happening in Connecticut. We've done a lot of activities in class, with different problems around the country. We looked at educational issues in Arizona. We looked at educational issues in Missouri. And because they're so far away, it doesn't hit quite as home as issues that are happening in Connecticut are. Like looking at the segregation of schools that's literally happening in Hartford was really eye-opening, because I live maybe a half hour from Hartford, and it was so interesting to see that the problems in education don't only happen in the South, where we're aware that there's a lot more racism in the South. We always think that that's where a lot of the issues are. You see a lot of stuff about Florida and Alabama and states like that, but seeing these issues arise in your own home state, especially when, it's not quite as widely known to be a state that has pushed for segregation and racial inequity before. So that topic really hit home and made me realize, when I become a teacher, these are issues that I will have to deal with, because there are issues like that in Connecticut, and I feel like a lot of people like to brush over that fact. So I never knew that before, and so learning that was extremely eye-opening, and it made me think a lot. So yeah, that's what I would say would have the biggest impact on me.
I think the biggest impact on me maybe I found a new and good way to study, because I knew before taking this class that I was very unfamiliar and incompetent with the topics that we might focus on in this class, and that's also a big reason why I take this course. And the learning method is, when I do not have many ideas about such topics, listening to other people's opinions is important for me to learn. The good thing is, in this class we have many various discussions, which allows me to have my own thinking while understanding other people's perspectives and ideas on the same just topics or problems. This made me learn and grow a lot in the process. I remember when the semester just began, the group discussions would sometimes become really awkward because I didn't know what and how to say. But that's become just less common now, not only because I'm more familiar with my classmates, but also because I gain a lot of knowledge from this class, which enabled me to have substance in speech during the discussion.
The biggest impact that this class has had on me this far has definitely been thinking about people's experiences in a larger scale. I have always been the kind of person to never judge someone or question why they're acting the way that they are in a specific moment, because you never know what people have had to deal with in certain situations and what they've experienced that might be making them act like this. I do study special education, so that's something major that I've always kind of thought about, and this class has brought that to a whole new level. When we did our value experiment thing, there was a lot of questions for me personally, just like going through and thinking about how I wanted to narrow these down and pick them. Because when you're looking at all of these things that you value in life and think about where you want to go, where you've been, and where you are in that moment, having to narrow them down to 5 is a very difficult thing. I had to think a lot about my past experiences and what I hope to experience in the future. So narrowing those down is very difficult, and then going through and seeing everyone else's values, what they feel are the most important things in life, in their life, specifically to hold close to their heart and their experiences, really did show me that you really can't judge people for how they're acting, what they're doing, what they're dealing with, and how they think. It's super important to me to think that way because, again, I study special ed and that's what I plan to teach. So never knowing what someone's going through is super important, and that's something that you have to keep in the back of your mind at all times, because you don't know what they've experienced and you don't know what you're going to experience.
In my opinion, the biggest problem facing education today is a lack of funding that districts may receive. No matter where you go, whether you're in a wealthy district or you're in a poor one, there's always going to be some kind of funding that just isn't available. If you look at what the district is getting from the state, there may be like private funding, or they may rely a lot on the PTA or other fundraising activities that happen throughout the year, but it will never be enough to give the children the education that they deserve. I feel like it's more prevalent in the districts that maybe don't have as much funding or as much resources, like community involvement and stuff like that. That really hinders the children in a way that they can never get back. If they don't even have the funding to buy, pencils, what will they use to write with? What will they use to complete the daily lessons that are necessary for them to continue moving in steps towards their future, towards their goals, whether it be education, whether it be entering the workforce in a solid foundation. I feel like a lack of funding really doesn't set them up for success, and that is really detrimental in so many ways. The children will just get like a poor quality of education. They won't be able to excel as much as other kids who have had more funding, whether it be from the community or from the state. So I think that the lack of funding is definitely an issue that should be addressed more than it is. Everyone's kind of aware of the lack of funding issue, but nobody really, I feel like we haven't really seen much change to it. I feel like a lot of the pressure is put onto teachers to fund their own classroom, but if that's going to be how it is, teachers should be paid more. I think it's just a cycle of just a lack of funding and a lack of willingness to fund the education system and teachers.
The biggest issue that I think is facing education today in Connecticut, especially from my personal experience, I think that minority isolation is like probably one of the biggest issues, and there's many tiers to it. I know for Connecticut especially, like there are towns that have an abundance amount of resources, and those towns are 90% white and 10% students of color. And then there are other schools that are 90% students of color, and they have, you know, limited resources, not that much funding, and it's because of a bunch of things. It's not just like on a school level or like a town level. It's mostly like, from my understanding, is the lawmakers and, you know, the tax things and the gerrymandering, I think is what it's called. There's a bunch of issues that, you know, all combine into one. And so I think that's probably one of the biggest issues, is that there's an opportunity gap just for public schools. And, you know, there's a bunch of different ways that they're trying to combat it. I know that there's magnet schools and stuff, but again, I've done some research on magnet schools, and there's definitely pros and cons to each. I think when it comes to education in Connecticut, if you want to be a teacher in Connecticut, that's probably one of the biggest issues you would face, is that, you know, I could go to clinic one place and they would have a bunch of resources, and then I could drive 10 minutes down the road and it would be a completely different experience. So that's what I think the biggest issue facing the education system today is.
I think the biggest problem facing the education system today is the racial inequality and inequity that's happening all over our country. Like I said before, there's a lot of just straight up segregation in schools, and it's, you know, we see that Brown versus Board of Ed has been passed, so, you know, there's no more segregation in schools, but that's not really true. There's a lot of factors at play, other than, you know, that Supreme Court ruling. And when we looked at the achievement gap, like there wasn't even any overlap in between students who are succeeding. So even though students were succeeding and declining at the same rate, they're not succeeding and declining equally and at the same level. And it's simply because we don't, you know, pour enough resources into schools with higher populations of students of color. And it's such a big problem that we're facing, and I've seen it in my own school. A lot of the students of color in my school were not given the same treatment and the same education that students like myself were given. And it was really disheartening to watch, even as a student, and now looking back on it, you know, preparing to be a future teacher, it's really an issue that needs to be addressed and discussed amongst teachers and future teachers as well, to create change, because it's so, we should be giving students of color more resources so that they are able to succeed at the same rate and at the same level that white students are succeeding at.
Okay, for the second question, I think the key word is imbalance, including the uneven distribution of educational resources, uneven opportunities for students in different regions, and so on. While it's impossible to be completely fair, there is definitely plenty of room for improvements in the current situation. Take China as an example. Due to its huge population base, the majority of students admitted to Chinese universities are basically only based on their college entrance examination scores. The difficulty of the examination varies across regions, and the admission numbers as well as score requirements differ for each university within those regions. Moreover, the score requirements for local students in each area are generally lower. These disparities arising from differences in education quality, examination difficulty, admission quotas, and score requirements have led to various imbalances. One of the most typical examples is that many of China's top universities are just located in Beijing. Those universities admit a significantly higher number of students from Beijing compared to other regions. However, the academic performance requirements for students from Beijing are much lower than those students from other regions. I remember seeing data about that the admission rate for Beijing students at the two best universities in China was 27 times higher than the admission rate in my hometown Minnan. In my opinion, this is a very exaggerated figure. So I think the biggest problem facing the education system at the present is imbalance.
In my opinion, the biggest problem facing our education system today would be oppression. Not just oppression for race like it was back in the day, although that is still present, not in the same way that it was, but it is still present. It has a lot to do, in my opinion, with gender, disability, race, class, everything. So I feel like that's a major problem in our education system because with disabilities, a lot of students, once they come forward, have the tests, then share it with the school, that school then treats them differently. And a lot of the time, it is good to be treated a little bit differently in that way in certain aspects. Like for me, I have some mental health problems, and once I tell the schools, things change. So my teachers would look at me differently and talk to me differently about assignments and stuff, which in some senses, that's okay if I need a little extra help. But the way that you would be looked at and like treated and talked about and talked to is very hard. And I do think that that runs across the board with gender, race, class, everything. And that is a huge problem in our education system today, and that's something that really needs to be worked on. That's not just about students, it's about everyone, and about their values and the values that the teachers hold, and about the values that the students hold, and that the school system holds, and the education, the school board holds, and everyone. So I think that that's something that we really need to work on as a whole, and it can't just be case by case. It needs to be as a whole, the entire school, the entire education system, the entire country.
The most positive experience that I had during my education was the amount of freedom I had in high school. My school was very hands-off in a way that we were allowed to pick what we were interested in. They weren't necessarily hands-off in a way that they didn't care. It's that they cared enough for us to figure out who we were as a student and what we were interested in. There were a lot of electives that we could take. Like there was a car shop. Even though we weren't a tech school, we were still able to take like woodworking or culinary or like home ec and stuff like that. There was also astronomy, there was forensic science, which was one of the classes I absolutely loved. I'm not gonna end up doing anything with it, but it was exciting for me to go into school and actually be looking forward to the day ahead, because I knew that I had forensics in period 3. So I think that the amount of freedom that I had definitely influenced me in the best way. It really allowed me to develop my own skills and to learn more about myself in the way that I learn material and how I can manage my time. I was able to like create my own schedule so I could figure out what pretty much worked best for me. If I wanted to take more challenging classes, I could. I ended up taking like 4 APs my junior year of high school just because I could, and that was the type of learning that I enjoyed. but I also knew other people who took it very easy because they were more committed outside of school. That's what they were more interested in, whether it was working or whether it was sports. Like they were a 3-sport athlete throughout the school year, which is very taxing, but that wasn't the case for me, and it wasn't a problem. The amount of freedom I have really allowed me to explore who I was as a person and as a student, and it allowed me to figure out what I wanted to do in my future. I took a lot of math electives, which led me to, be a math major and decide that I wanted to go into math education. So that was definitely the most positive experience. Encouraging non-educators to support students is a kind of a tricky thing to think about. We talked a little bit in class about whose responsibility it is to ensure that students get a proper education. And I was kind of in the middle because I felt like it wasn't everybody's responsibility to make sure that students get an education, but at the same time, it's the future of the world. So I feel like everybody should have some kind of focus in that. I would encourage non-educators to support students by donations. If you're financially able, a little goes a long way in education, because you could buy a box of crayons and that would brighten a student's day, or you could buy whiteboard markers so students aren't just looking at the color black all day long. If you're more into politics and you're more into volunteering, just volunteering at bake sales to raise money, or literally any kind of fundraising work, or devoting extra time to students, that takes a lot of the baggage off of the actual teachers, who can focus more on supporting their students' education rather than doing everything else like they're expected to. Politicians, I feel like, have a lot more impact when it comes to supporting students, so I would encourage them to really think about what kind of quality of education the students will be getting if they sit and do nothing. It's definitely scary to think about what would happen if there was no one advocating for students. So I think that politicians, I would definitely encourage to get involved in some capacity with education, even if it's not their focal point. If it's just an everyday citizen, I would say writing letters is very simple. Just sending, signing a petition, putting your name down on something that would support students, like getting more Chromebooks, or passing a legislation that would allow students, to receive more funding, stuff like that. I think that there's a lot that could be done. I think it's just a question of whether or not people feel like they're making a difference. But I think I would encourage people to think about the impact that they could have, and remind them that no gesture is too small when it comes to education, because it is the future of the world.
My educational experience definitely affected my view on the education system, almost in a negative way, in terms of, my ignorance towards it. I grew up in Fairfield County in Connecticut, which is a very affluent community. I think I had a little bit of a different experience than most students that go there, just because I was probably one of the few students that was on a free lunch program. My family was not wealthy by any means. I come from a very big family. And so I just thought that, everyone went to, a really nice school with great resources, and I almost took that for granted. But I definitely felt like I knew that I was kind of the odd student out. Like, there was definitely some opportunities that I was not given due to, my family's financial situation. So I think that I was ignorant in some ways, thinking that, taking some things for granted, and I got an amazing educational experience, and I was very prepared for college, and that's something I'm very grateful for. But I also know the other side of it, where some students might be, feel left out, or feel kind of marginalized because they're different than their classmates. I think socioeconomic is a big gap for students, and it's very personal. So I kind of see both sides, and for me, for the education system, I hope that the opportunity gap kind of closes in that way, that all students are given the same amount of opportunities regardless of their socioeconomic status or where they were born or where they went to school, especially in Connecticut. I've definitely given a lot of thought to how I plan to address diversity and inclusivity into my classroom. As I've gone through a bunch of different clinic placements, I've learned so much through different, school districts and how each school incorporates diversity and inclusivity. I think, obviously setting expectations for everybody in the classroom is really important. Setting like expectations for, respect and being kind to others, especially even from kindergarten all the way up to 5th grade, like that is obviously the first thing. But also I think literature is a huge asset when it comes to talking about issues that students might be facing but don't know how to articulate. There's a bunch of SEL picture books and stuff that is really, you can teach students, the literary aspects of it, and it applies to their daily life. Like, there's books on hunger, books on obviously diversity, and I think that would be a big asset to my classroom and something I definitely want to incorporate. I want to be very strategic about like my classroom library, what books are in there, and also like which books I choose for read alouds, just so that every student is, has a voice, is seen in the literature that we're reading. I also think to address diversity and inclusivity in the classroom, it's really important to get to know your students. I know that I love how my clinic teacher, she really knows her students and also her students' culture and is able to incorporate activities that, coincide with their culture, and they get so excited and so happy to share that with their class and their friends. My teacher also asked the parents to send in like family photos, and so she hangs them all around the classroom so the students can see like every family is different and everyone looks different, but we're all a community together. So that's definitely some strategies that I'll use in my own classroom.
Some educational issues that have been manifested in my own school experience have really affected me. I always noticed this throughout high school, but I didn't put 2 and 2 together until this year. But my school offered a lot of college level courses and AP courses, and we also had the accelerated level and the academic level, which was the lowest performing academic classes that you could take. And though my school was mostly a school with mostly students of color, it was all of the college level classes were filled with mostly white students, despite how many students of color were in my school. And like the lower academic classes had more and more students of color in them. And I think a lot of it too was that the teachers in my school did not reflect the student body whatsoever. I would say 95% of the teachers in my school were white. Even though I would say around 60 to 65% of the school was students of color. And we even had a lot of English second language students who were trying to learn English, and teachers would not be accommodating, and they would suffer in their classes, which was so unfortunate to see. And another big issue I saw manifested in my school was just blatant homophobia and transphobia. Teachers would not take the time to, if a student corrected them on their pronouns, a teacher would not really take the time to learn it. And students around my school would throw around the F slur like it was nothing, and teachers wouldn't even bat an eye. It was so sad to see, and especially as someone from the LGBTQ community, I would hear that word and see nothing done, and it would feel like a punch in the gut, because teachers wouldn't do anything about the homophobia that students obviously had towards other students. And that was really disheartening to see. So those are some of the issues that we've covered in class. That's how they've affected my education. I think when I enter a classroom, I'm going to be more conscious just about my place and what power I hold. As a white woman, I do have quite a bit of privilege in this world, and I think I'm going to be more conscious about the way that I teach, what content I am teaching, how I can make things more culturally relevant to students who aren't like me and don't have the same experiences as me. And even, asking students who aren't like me what kinds of topics they would like to be covered in class, or what kinds of things are relevant to them that I could use in my classroom. I think it's really important that students are represented in a classroom, and so I want to be sure that I'm not only representing my specific point of view, I want to make sure that I'm representing all of my students. And I also want to be a resource for them to stand up for themselves and to advocate for themselves, because there are a lot of educational inequalities, and if I can be a resource for students to fight for their right to education, and the same education as their peers and counterparts, I want to be able to do that and be able to help them in the best way that I can with my privilege. So I want to be able to use my privilege to help my students who don't have as much privilege as me. And I also want to be conscious of the way that I'm teaching, and how I can make my content more relevant to students who aren't like me and do not share the same identity as me.
Well, for the third question, I think the answer is varies from person to person, so I may answer it based more on my experience. In my opinion, a teacher who can be called a good teacher needs to meet following conditions. First, know how to teach students in accordance with their aptitude. Second, in addition to their own academic achievement, know how to teach. Third, be a good person. So the first is to teach students in accordance with their aptitude. The first time I heard about this concept was mentioned by Confucius, which is a great educator in ancient China. Because everyone is different and every student has their own learning preference, there will definitely be students who cannot adapt or cannot keep up if all students are treated in the same way. Therefore, it is important to provide differentiated teaching to students with different needs when conditions permit. In addition to personalization in teaching method, it is also important to tap the potential of each student. I think, it's just very important to be able to identify some students with special needs or special abilities. Just for a really easy example, if a teacher always forced a painting genius to learn mathematics that he's not good at, I think that's burying the talent. Well, the next point is knowing how to teach. There are some professors in universities who are elite in their research fields, but they are not good at teaching, which makes it difficult for students to obtain high-quality knowledge from them. I also encountered such a teacher when I was in high school. She could get very high TOEFL scores, but she didn't know how to teach her students to get high score as well. So I think in that situation, knowing how to teach, knowing good teaching method is really important as a teacher. In addition to that type, there are also some teachers who have certain problems with their teaching methods. Their teaching method may hurt students' self-confidence, put excessive pressure on students, suppress students' enthusiasm, and so on. Possible situations I've met include that announcing the rankings or even grades of low-ranking students in front of the whole class, or even blaming them, constantly pushing students when they take the time to understand certain knowledge, inappropriate punishment, discriminating against students, and so on. And the third, and I think the most important thing, is to be a good person first. Many teachers are role models in the mind of children and play a subtle role in guiding them. Therefore, in addition to imparting in-class knowledge, it is necessary to cultivate students' study habits and teach students to be good people before being good students. Imitation is one of the most important learning methods for students, I think, especially for the young kids. And teachers, as their common imitation objects, should set a good example. Well, for the last question, how to define inclusive education? The first relevant concept I heard was also from Confucius, who said education without distinction or without category. I strongly agree with this view that imparting knowledge should not be treated differently based on students' ability, background, or any other differences. The purpose of education is to teach people to become less ignorant and to become a better version of themselves. And everyone should enjoy that right. And since I'm a special education major student, my definition of the concept has become more focused on students with disabilities. Unlike traditional models that may segregate students based on ability or disability, inclusive education prompts the integration of students with different needs into mainstream classrooms. Although there is growing interest in collaboration between general education and special education teachers to meet the needs of diverse students, special education resources remain relatively scarce, especially in developing countries. Take my hometown, Yunnan, China, as an example. There were no special education teachers in the ordinary schools I attended growing up. The education system for typical people with disabilities was also incomplete. So the development of the special education still has a long way to go, I think.
My biggest challenge in school stemmed from my mental health and the way that the school system would treat me and the way that teachers treated me and friends and everything. From inside to outside of school, that was a problem for me. For a while, I couldn't even walk into the school, and the school never offered me a counselor. They never offered me anything besides the fact of, let's just get you into the building. So the only people that would come out and talk to me when I was outside was the principal or like a secretary. I was never in trouble, but it was just those kinds of things where it was, why isn't someone trained in mental health or something talking to me? And so that was the start of like things that really stemmed from that. And once I got to high school, it definitely changed a little bit where teachers were different. They were more accepting of it, I'd say, but it was more of a thing that we talked about. It wasn't really something that in those younger ages, the school system really talks about or acknowledges. They never really acknowledged the fact that I was struggling. It was just more of a, okay, Ella's outside again, like that kind of thing. But in high school, there were a few teachers that didn't accommodate to the things that I needed. They didn't help, they treated me differently, XYZ, did the entire thing that you probably should not be doing to students that are struggling. But there were a few every now and again that would come in and they would talk to me and help me through it and accommodate for anything that I needed at the time, which was amazing to see. But for the most part, teachers didn't change their way because that's their way. That's what they wanted to do and that's how they did it. So that was probably one of my bigger challenges in school, was being talked to differently, being put differently just because of my mental health issues and the things that I needed to be accommodated for. How will my experience in the education system help me become a better teacher in the future? For me, education was always something that was a hit or miss. Now that I'm in college, it's definitely more of a hit because I'm studying what I want to be studying. Although yes, you have those gen eds that you don't love to take, but I'm mostly studying things that I want to connect to and things that I know are going to be my career in the future. So I absolutely love it. In high school, middle school, like, you're forced to be there, you're forced to take those classes. So I know that a lot of students don't want to be there, and that's something super important to me to bring into the classroom when I'm teaching, because I know my students most of the time don't want to be there, and that's totally fine. I totally understand that, but my students will know that if they're having a bad day, come talk to me. I will listen, I will be there, and if you want advice, I will give it to you. But other than that, like, I will be there. I am gonna have you do your work, obviously, like, you're gonna learn, you're gonna do this, but I'm not gonna force you to be there and be present all the time, every hour, every minute of every single day. Because I know that what we're dealing with outside of school affects us in school. And something that I've always been told was by teachers and stuff is when you're in school to leave everything outside of school at the door. And that's just not how it works, especially in elementary school, middle school. Like, you can't differentiate those things, you can't compartmentalize at that age, and it becomes difficult and straining. So leaving those things outside isn't gonna work. My students will always know that they can come to me and talk to me and not have to hold it in all day, that they have the opportunity to speak freely if they need to.